Eileen,
Oh, okay.
I thought you were muted. I was gonna try to push a button and get you involved.
She muted herself.
Oh, okay, oh,
So, John, I'm going to ask you in a moment to take the role tonight, but this meeting of the task force on the structure of city government is called to order. Because I am participating by phone and can't really read the room, I've asked once again for the vice chair, John Rothschild, to chair tonight's meeting, so I'm going to turn it over to John for a roll call. Thanks.
okay, Eileen, thank you. So, call the order, well, the order has been done. We take the roll, Justice Castaneda,
Here.
Rebecca Kimball,
In the garage.
Eric Upchurch, absent, he's not by phone, is he? No. Maggie Northrup.
Here.
Sherry Carter. Rebecca Kimball has now entered the room, so your counter is being present for purposes of the roll call. Roger Goodwin, welcome. New member, thank you. Alder Paul Skidmore is absent. David Aarons. John Rothschild here, and the chair, Eileen Harrington, is here by telephone.
Here.
Gets us to the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. I have a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes, any corrections? If not, on the motion to approve, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No one's opposed. There are members of the public present, I believe. Are there any registered and choosing to speak to us at this time?
I don't have any. You want to register to speak?
No, I'm actually staff. I'll let you know. I'm the new legislative analyst for the county
Oh, okay.
council.
Nice to meet you.
Just thought I would come and stop by today.
Nice to meet you.
Hello.
Karen.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no requests to speak at this time, we'll move to disclosures and recusals. Any members of the task force that have to make a disclosure or recusal at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5. We have kind of a full agenda tonight and perhaps bad weather coming. So we will keep moving along as best we can. We'll turn it over to Enos for the presentation.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend Robert's rules to allow for free-flowing discussion for whatever members of the public may enter and us.
All right, and then do I hear a second on that motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now we move to item 5. I believe you've prepared a PowerPoint presentation which is going to be projected on the board for those of you who didn't get a copy. And we were asked as a task force to look at the structure of the mayor's office. Some questions have come up in the course of discussions both at the subcommittee on boards, commissions, and committees, and in the council, two groups that are, two subcommittees that are looking at issues related to the structure of the city of Madison government. And as a task force, we decided that the time had come where we needed to have some briefing on the staffing of the mayor's office and some idea of the budget and the functions that the mayor's office undertakes with the staff. So he's agreed to come talk to us.
Well, thank you for inviting me to this evening to share the mayor's office budget with you. And Laura Larson is the budget manager for finance department, and is here to assist me and correct me and whatever else needs to be done over here. We'll start with the mayor's office budget highlights, and it states the mission of the mayor's office, which is to provide leadership. And stop me at any time if you have questions. Leadership for the organization, deliver the highest quality services, and provide a fair and orderly system of governance for residents and visitors. Key activities in our office: we provide guidance and direction for city agencies, including appointments and evaluating city heads. We direct interagency staff teams working to solve cross-cutting problems impacting the community and organizations. We develop and submit the annual budget for the city, and we offer resident appointments to city committees, boards, and commissions to the county council for approval. The budget components include personnel, staffing costs associated with operating the mayor's office, non-personnel supplies and contractual services associated with carrying out the work of the mayor's office, and revenue, miscellaneous, typically donations. Revenue is used to offset costs associated with specific types of programming. I passed out a paper that details a bit more the responsibilities of each of the mayor's office staff, the deputies, including the food policy administrator, neighborhood resource coordinator, and the administrative coordinator positions in the mayor's office. And we have one executive assistant to the mayor, we have 2 mayoral office clerks, we have 5 deputy mayors, it's a food policy administrator, neighborhood resource coordinator, and administrative coordinator for 12 FTEs in the mayor's office. This one. Okay. So there's a slide that did not make it into your packet. It's up on the screen. It's a summary of the mayor's office budget, revenue from 2017 through 2019, and any change in those numbers. And below are bullet points that explain any particular changes in the budgets for those particular years. And one of them is the reduction is for 2019 is driven by incorporating the city's cost allocation plan into the 2019 budget. And as it explains, the cost allocation plan seeks to recuperate overhead costs from non-general fund agencies. And that was a decision made by the finance department and affected a number of agencies across the city. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Has there been any significant change in the duties from assistant mayor to deputy mayor? Do the deputy mayors now have line authority over the different agencies that they oversee, or is it just still a liaison?
It was a title change. The responsibilities did not change. It's something that had been discussed, and as many of you know, I've served with 3 different mayors, and each mayor I've served with had discussed making that title change and looked at other cities around the country, and it made it clearer that we were performing duties that deputy mayors perform in other cities. So that was basically the reason for that.
But the mayor's span of control is still over 30?
Yes.
That was my concern.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess in terms of the chart that produced, though that is a chart of the mayor's office, I think the other line that would go down from the mayor is a multitude of department heads
Reports.
that report to him. And it's unusual. You know, I mean, I think, my notion of HR is that in a managerial function, 5 or 6 direct reports is about the outer limit. And here we have 30? Is it 30? Yeah. So in addition to you guys.
In reality, the department has report to the deputies.
Yes.
For the most part. Any particular policy decisions, changes go directly to the mayor. Day-to-day operational
Yeah.
duties the mayor delegates to the deputies
Mhm.
response. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Alder Kimball?
I have a question about revenues, and I see you have a couple slides, you're gonna get into it, but how is that, are those negative numbers for Laura?
We just show them as a negative because that's how they show in the accounting system. So, for example, in 2017, the actual revenue that was received was $2,200, $2,243. So the way the math works is you would do a negative 2,200 plus then the 1.3 million plus 178,000. So, yeah,
Because it's offset.
Yes.
exactly.
Okay.
It's a net.
Another question, I guess, not said about the budget, is What's the thinking of having the neighborhood resource team and food policy coordinators working out of the mayor's office as opposed to having the food policy person be in the health department, the NRT person potentially in DCED, or health department, or, I mean, more in operational, where other units of the government are working on very similar issues, that that person would be more directly engaged as opposed to being up on the fourth floor.
Actually, ironically, the mayor was just talking about that at council leadership a little bit earlier this evening, particularly about the food policy position and where it should be permanent. Many of those positions are established in the mayor's office to help them gain traction. The importance of it is a priority for the city, and to help get the other partners within the community to come together and support what we're doing. But for the long term, and to stay in the position, I think the mayor agrees with you that some of those should be in other departments.
So it's viewed sort of as a pilot, when you get the pilot position going.
Yeah. Neighborhood research teams I see a little differently because employees are assigned from different departments to serve on the resource teams. And I think the mayor has the authority to tell department heads, yes, you should assign people to these teams. Whereas, for example, the health department, the director could say that and people think, well, okay, that's your opinion. But, you know, the mayor is supervisor of all the department heads. So I see the neighborhood resource team coordinator position being more in the mayor's office for that reason.
Historically, the mayor's office has been a starting point for a number of positions. I think the affirmative action director originally was in the mayor's office. CDBG
was in the mayor's office.
CETA was in there.
Yeah.
The city cable was in there.
Yeah.
And then eventually they got farmed out to whatever agency didn't put up the biggest fight.
I don't know how much of this, a question. As you said that the deputy, that the reports are to the deputies from the department, like some of these departments have multiple deputies that they report to. So how does that work?
I don't think there's any departments that.
Yeah, community development division. So like,
okay.
now this whole shop is broken down.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you're looking at why, well, let's just say that ideally, everything in DPCD would operate in synergy in order for those things to function. Like, I don't understand how you can do community development without incorporating economic development. When you have two different reports, getting two different messages, how does that work?
So I wasn't on staff in that decision to delineate which duties go to which deputies at that time. So I don't know what thinking was going behind Anmos having the housing part of it, because more economic development in their area in housing, that's in CBD, and then more of the community services part of it is in Gloria Reyes' area. So that's the way it's split up. And it does, I haven't become aware of any problems with that. In Gloria and talk deputies, we have a meeting scheduled weekly discussing issues that come up and things that we need to share. But you raise a legitimate concern. But it hasn't been a problem as far as I'm aware so far.
To a large extent, hasn't been a reflection of the organization structure. For example, economic development was in planning development, so but community services, on the other hand, is always a separate agency.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. And when we created CDD, we brought in a number of different agencies that were separate at one point, and responsibility for those areas, I believe it was felt that since Gloria has neighborhoods, police, fire, community, that the community services part is better fit under her, and Ann is more the economic development part, so the housing will fit more under her with her expertise, and I think that's the thinking behind it.
So I guess this could get tangential, I don't know that it's, I just will say that some of the challenges we're seeing with the effectiveness of governance, the way that it's showing up is because of, I'll just say erratic or disconnection between things that are fundamentally connected. So how do you do housing without economic development? I mean, and so when you're planning a housing project and you're not thinking about the support infrastructure for that housing because they're in two separate, they're in two separate veins that are not talking, and the committees that are associated with those things are completely separate. This is why I think this is just a point that I would like to just bring up, that in terms of the way that this is structured in the mayor's office currently, it could invite this type of disconnection or a loose coupling, which is showing up in terms of the way that people are viewing the government's function or the effectiveness of government.
Moving on to the personnel budget, total FTE count has remained unchanged since 2009 at 12 positions. 2012, the fiscal efficiency auditor was eliminated, and in 2013, the NRT coordinator was transferred from public health back to the mayor's office. The dip in 2012 reflects increased salary savings due to a change in administrations, and the 2017 budget reclassified mayoral assistants to deputy mayors. We went to revenue, 2009 to 11, the amount of 37,000 to 44,000. The revenue 2012 was 20,000, partial year funding from UW for the alcohol policy coordinator position. It's now funded by general fund, 2014 to 2016. 20,000 was revenue with some private contributions for the bike summit. 2017, the amount of $35,000 assumed funding for the bike summit and summer food program that was previously grant funded. And then in 2018, 2019, the revenue amount was reduced to zero. The assumed revenue removed from the mayor's office budget was based on trends and actual revenues, that we weren't getting some of those contributions that we had put in the budget for. And so finance felt that it was truer budget to put those amounts at zero and then amend the budget if necessary if those revenues came in. Is that correct? Any questions on this?
Which revenues are you counting on, do you think we might get yet for 2019?
I think there's any in capital, there's none in the budget for 2019.
Not in the budget, but you said that might come in. So is there any attempt to be fundraising for any particular thing?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. And I know the revenues that were there for the bike summit never happened. And so those went back into the general fund. Correct? Okay. So far I'm doing good, because Laura hasn't had to correct me yet. This is also a revenue,
That's just air.
That's the air, just the
Yeah.
same slide.
Yeah,
I thought
it's
that was.
the same slide.
Okay. And then, so we go to just non-personnel, special programs in 2019 budget are $67,500 total, $27,500 are in the neighborhood resource teams budget. And that operating costs were first included in the 2014 budget. Neighborhood resource team budget funds retreats for the neighborhood resource teams, placemaking, initiatives that neighborhoods might want to undertake, and we need some funding to help support that. So that's how those funds are used. There's $25,000 in the budget for My Brother's Keeper, which was a President Obama initiative that started in his administration. It continues as a nonprofit, and we subcontracted with the Urban League to fulfill the My Brother's Keeper initiatives. There's $25,000 in the budget for that as a direct appropriation, and then it was moved into the mayor's office in 2017. The summer food program was one of those that we were hoping to get revenue or contributions for, and we weren't able to do that, and so that created a deficit in our budget. So that's being funded through the general fund. That started in 2017. And then the travel and training budget for 2019 is $57,000. It was increased in 2013 and 14. has remained flat since 2014.
This is a question, neighborhood resource teams, so that's for the designated teams, right? That's what that money's for?
Yeah, those teams and neighborhood initiatives as well.
Okay, I'll start there. When we looked at this, when we asked the city how they created these teams, they said they used 3 indicators. Public health indicators, which is the closest one, then police calls and building inspection. When we looked at that over 48 months, it wasn't consistent, so there was no rhyme or reason as to how these things were formed, and why there was an allocation to these, how the geographies were created. And so I'm curious if we've done anything to readjust or reassess why we have this allocation to neighborhoods, to the geographic places without any, why are we picking these places? How do we pick them?
To my understanding, there is a formula that is used to determine which are what I used to call challenged neighborhoods. It was back in the 90s when Mayor Soglin and I created the neighborhood resource teams, and it was a focus on our challenged neighborhoods. It is the city's #1 equity initiative into the neighborhoods. And so I believe, I know when we created them, there was a criteria that was used. Under subsequent mayors, that was changed. And I know that when Mayor Soglin came back into office, he wanted to refocus it back to the original concept of focusing on challenged neighborhoods, neighborhoods that need additional support, are not empowered to call City Hall and ask, my garbage hasn't been picked up, I need, assistance. So the goal is to get people to be confident to be able to make those calls themselves and to ensure that they get the services that every other neighborhood gets. They require some additional services at times because there's a high transitory nature to some of the neighborhoods. People move for a lot of different reasons. They need they have 1 bedroom, they need a 2-bedroom. Their lease wasn't renewed for whatever reason, and then we may need to do additional trash pickup because people move in the middle of the month, and you don't want that to stay out there for
No, I get all that, I'm just saying, from 11 to 14, we looked at, and those neighborhoods haven't changed, they're the same ones. They got rid of the Langley Street one. But the other ones stay the same, there's no rhyme or reason as to why. Like the south side, there's no, if you looked at the actual criteria that they're saying they're using, and I just say it just because of the application and the way that we're looking at this. What we did find is that if you looked at a scatter plot where people of color live, you found neighborhood resource teams. Whereas if you actually looked at the data that supposedly was informing you, there was no rhyme or reason to it. And I don't think that it's changed. I just am curious if there was any.
I would argue that they are in places where the rents are affordable. And that's where people move to, where rents are affordable. And sometimes those particular areas require additional services for a lot of different reasons. And that would be my, but I would suggest that maybe have Tarek come in and speak with you about neighborhood resource teams, and if there's a criteria. I'm not aware of what the criteria is currently, but I know what it was before. It was police calls and building inspection was also, notices were also a part of that, as well as a transitory nature where new landlords were, people were purchasing buildings, and make sure that the landlords understood our expectations of them for screening and keeping their properties clean and things like that. So that was the original purpose of it. And as I said, under subsequent mayors wanting to put their mark on the teams, they changed it a bit. And so I think now we're trying to get it back to the original purpose and focus on those neighborhoods in need.
Have the neighborhoods changed?
They have changed from time. I remember
Sue Bauman did it
North.
and she had 4. She made it a lot bigger, and there was fewer of them. So she changed them from when Enos, and they did this in the 90s.
Yeah.
I wrote a report I could give to the committee.
Yeah, it was all I could not convince her not to do that, but she did that. But
So could you just, for those of us who aren't familiar with this, just tell us what they do and how it works?
Okay,
I mean,
there-
'cause I don't really.
Okay, neighborhood resource teams are teams of city employees who impact neighborhoods. So police, fire, public health, libraries are neighborhoods, so they're there. Parks are there from time to time. Community development staff are there.
In the neighborhood,
Building
by
inspection, yeah.
there, you mean they go through the neighborhood?
They are in the meetings that, and the focus and the goal is for our city employees to share information on what's going on in the neighborhood. So we have a holistic picture of what's going on. Building inspection knows something, police knows something, fire knows, public health knows.
How does the interaction occur with the residents of those neighborhoods?
They
This team-
interact with the residents. Residents are invited to come to meetings, and some do. Resident leaders have shown up at meetings from time to time.
And where are the meetings?
The meetings, I'm not quite sure where they're held now.
There are a number of places, a lot of libraries, they use a lot of libraries, they use a lot of community
The
centers.
one
I'm
I
just-
mentioned is at Warner Park
Warner
Community
Park,
Rec
okay.
Center.
Yeah,
I'm
It's
just-
clearly a
the reason
staff
I'm-
meeting, it's
Yeah.
not like a meeting for the community.
Right.
It is very clearly a staff meeting.
right.
Okay.
It's held
During the day.
from 8:30 in the morning to 10, when staff, because it's a staff meeting. And from time to time, like, neighborhood leaders might be invited, it's a public, I think it's a publicly noticed, is it a publicly noticed? No, it's
No,
not.
it's not.
It's not publicly noticed, but, so like the director of Warner Park Community Rec Center is there, and people, for example, Northside Planning Council, director is there, so like leader, it's very much like staff and like top line community leaders, but it's not really a forum for resident engagement.
Okay.
Two reasons why this, again, let's keep going, but the, one thing is about the allocation here, and the way that this is put out, and the other thing is for the task force, and one of the conversations that we're talking about is how this thing could shift or change in order to assist the operation of, in particular, the BCCs. So that's why I kind of wanted to ask those questions.
It's a BCC.
Boards, commissions, and committees, sorry.
Oh,
So the
okay.
boards, commissions, and committees.
It's our acronym. It's a new acronym. You just developed here.
Thank you. I needed one. But it's important that our city staff who are working in those neighborhoods are communicating with each other, sharing information, so we have a holistic picture of what's going on in those neighborhoods. And we can hopefully head off problems that may be bubbling up. For example, if we know there's a new landlord who isn't screening and leasing to people who've been evicted from every other place in the city, we need to know that. If there's a family that moves in that is being disruptive to the neighborhood, we need to know that, so we can intervene and things like that. Building inspection in the past has shared information with the police on when they've gone into buildings and they've seen drugs stored in basements or even weapons at times, stored in basements, hangars or whatever, and they can report on that. Public health has, in communicating with police, has headed off STDs among teenagers in some of our neighborhood years ago. So there's.
So it's primarily a coordination of staff efforts,
Yeah.
not a
It's,
resident.
the title's a
Right.
little misleading then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very misleading, yeah.
I was on a neighborhood resource team when I was street superintendent for a while. I was on the Allied Drive one. And I'll give you an example. We were on there because they're having all sorts of problems with the bike path between Carlin Drive and between Allied Drive. And our duty was to go there and clean all the brush out on either side of the bike path and clearly make it more open and make it safer. So that was an example of kind of why we were on the team.
Right.
And then we were done with that, and then we sort of faded off the team.
Yeah, and I think that's the way it is now. You bring people in to utilize their expertise as subject matter experts, but then there's a core group of folks, of city employees who are on the teams.
I'll send it to the thing, I'll find it and send it. I will say, in intent, I get the place, I mean, the idea of having geographic neighborhood intervention strategies is something that there's literature on it. The challenges that we saw is that the static nature of them didn't make any sense. So how they were being identified and how they were focusing, there was no rhyme or reason to it. And then the other thing is that we found, depending on who the lead was, so Tarek is taking more of an active role, but public health, for instance, was doing some phenomenal work. And there was, the way that the police were using it versus the way the public health was using it were totally at odds. And so you ended up in this situation where you had overt surveillance in neighborhoods, which it was antithetical to the work that public health at the time was trying to do. So it's one of those things that there's a lot of, but again, this is something that as we look at this Orens concept, I think it's something to think about because it's a huge component, and if you thought about how to tweak this thing in a way that could activate some of the, the resources, definitely, I think the building inspection stuff is huge, right? Because I know right now, even in Allied Drive, it's a huge issue, so the building inspection has been very instrumental in getting, being a conduit for the residents through the, as Alder Kimball called, top line, neighborhood leaders, I don't know what you call it, but getting information to building inspection about specific properties that have not been kept up, and they've been really good about getting folks out there to take care of them. So.
Or for example, public health realized that when they were dead, there's a problem with bed bugs in apartments or in a particular building, and then people were tossing out the mattresses and other people were taking them in because they looked good, and so working with the neighborhood resource team started to spray paint those mattresses, bed bugs, so people wouldn't take them in, or sofas or other furniture like that. So that's part of the value of city employees talking and sharing information about what's going on in the neighborhood so we can head off problems or prevent them.
I wasn't asking because I didn't think there was value, I just wanted to know
Yeah.
how it was working,
But
because
it's
we have been
just-
talking about engagement of residents, and I wondered if that was.
So when we looked at it, so like the Darwin one, the geography is very restricted, for instance. And so when we looked at like we did this a number of different ways, but where we actually saw anything ranging from like drug activity or like Thompson Drive is another place that technically could have, so like there was no conduit for residents in some of our other lowest income pockets that we have around the city to have the same type of thing. So the question comes back, why these geographies? And the one that really stuck out was the south side. So you have this Park Street, and in reality, at the time, I know that there was a number of things that were happening within the Meadowwood one, but there was no rhyme or reason as to why Park Street had an NRT. Because actually it had not been, in terms of all the indicators, there was no, it's relatively mellow, right? So that was the challenge.
For example, Northport Packer Apartments used to be an NRT. It's no longer one.
Beer Court was.
Beer Court was one, and the street complex down on West Washington,
Not true, not a.
Bayview. Bayview was an NRT area at one point as well, and it's no longer. So there's criteria for designating one and criteria when you can move that designation away from that. And I think having Tara here to talk about that, and a lot of the resident engagement that NRTs do and have done, and some of the initiatives that the council has funded that have come through NRTs to the county council, to the mayor, and to the county council to support things that neighborhoods want. I think there's a water splash park is one. I don't remember where. The movie nights is something that neighborhood resource teams have engaged residents to. Weekend bus service is another one.
All three bus services and this stuff.
Yeah, all three bus service. So there's value there. And like I said, different mayors have tried to put their stamp on it and taken away from the original focus of the NRTs, and now we're trying to get back to it. Any other questions for me and or Laura?
I just wanted to indicate for Eileen that we have been joined by Alders Furman, Carter, and Skidmore in the course of Venus's presentation.
Thanks, John.
Well, thank you all.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
You want me to text you the scores, the game?
Yeah, that's why we got these TVs.
So Roger's got
The mayoral forum.
Yeah.
I want to invite
I
you,
don't know.
I want to invite you to your retirement party.
Huh?
I said, I want to invite you to your.
Absolutely,
retirement party.
absolutely. I'm gonna have one.
In Vegas, I'm sure.
Huh?
In Vegas, I'm
No,
sure.
I'll have one here.
You have to have it in the known terrace.
Huh?
I said you'll have to have it in the known terrace.
I think I can afford it.
Sorry.
Yes.
I have it in the known.
Thank you.
All right, item 6 on the agenda. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Item 6 on the agenda is a review of the information that Roger Goodwin so nicely compiled for us relating to the history of the staffing in the mayor's office.
And the common council.
Oh, any kind of council?
Yeah, I just spent some time in, looking over old budgets at Central Library. And some of them is kind of nostalgic, because I helped make them umpty years ago. And so I didn't realize that Enos was going to be presenting a chart that basically covered at least half of the data that I put together, but that's fine.
You called me, I told you I did your work.
No, we're just checking on Enos. So, I think it's pretty much self-explanatory. And there has been a growth in the number of assistants to the mayors. Starting back when I came out of the city, there were 3, and now there's essentially 5, and probably attribute that to the growth of the city as well. The council staffing stayed pretty much steady until all some of the changes in 2017 made sense.
Well, I'd like to clarify something on that because the legislative analyst has always been part of the council, although they were housed in the attorney's office, so,
Yeah, that was, I put that in one of the notes.
okay, great, thank you.
Wasn't the legislative analyst at one time in the mayor's office?
It was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I think it was how, that's back when,
It's a different one.
Harold
Oh,
Clibbertons.
yes,
Harold
yeah.
Clibbertons was legislative analyst, but I think he was probably holding a consistent mayor position because I couldn't find any record of that title back during those times.
Didn't Jim O'Keefe?
Well, Jim O'Keefe did it. Also, who was the Hispanic guy, the lawyer?
Mario.
Mario Mendoza. He
And now it's
also
Nick.
served in that capacity. But again, they were holding one of those assistant mayor positions, and then they just did designate it as such. The
Those
only
are
real-
more like lobbyists, not analysts.
Or lobbyists, yeah. They
Yeah.
call them analysts, or they call them lobbyists. Yeah,
Yeah.
lobbyist was actually the
Yeah.
more appropriate term.
Whatever.
Yeah. Now, where, for example, when Cheslevs came in, he created the fiscal efficiency auditor. And then when Soglin came back, of course, that position left, but I think it was switched over then to some other position. I don't think it was lost. No, actually it dropped. It went from 12 total positions down to 11, but then crept back up to 12 later. Also, as I recall, different mayors would have their own budget analyst. For example, Ron Sprecher was the budget analyst for Skornik, I think. Was at Sensenbrenner, I'm not sure which. And then Mike Williamson also served in that capacity for, I believe, Sensenbrenner.
That's right.
But again, it wasn't specified as budget analyst, it was under the assistant to the mayor position. But they would take on duties that were somewhere else in the bureaucracy because they wanted to have more control over it. And then the new mayor would come in, keep the position, but give it a different emphasis.
Question?
Joe?
Alder Aaron, sir,
Yes.
one of the, I just want to make sure I got it right. One of your concerns, or one of the reasons you found this so germane to this task force is because, and just so I have it right, is because you felt like this, in terms of the balance, the check and balance between the mayor's office, and it was related to the idea that we have a part-time council And that staffing alone was inequitable, is that right? I just want to make sure.
No.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, help me, help me, sir.
Oh, no, it's not really related. I mean, the fundamental problem is, one of the fundamental problems that I hope to address is the appointment power. Perhaps if there was more a balance in appointment power, then that might affect some staffing issues. But I don't think that's really the critical piece here. I think that with a equitable staffing, looking at, say, the budget issue, I mean, the budget is not a majority, but it's certainly it's the essential piece of work for the government. Because the mayor controls that totally, both in terms of his appointment power of department heads, and then his appointment power of the legislative review. So if there was the legislative review was controlled, in fact, by the legislature and not by the mayor, then there might be a greater need and influence on the budget. But we've never had really a legislative, an effective legislative review of the budget. Because all the major players are appointed by the mayor.
Just to be clear, you're talking about the finance committee.
Yeah, finance committee, and also really how other committees operate. When I was appointed to the Board of Public Works, so that was in April when I started, and then in June I asked when we would start reviewing the Board of Public Works budget. And it was, considered to be, what? Why would we do that? So I think that and this is, it's always variable, it may not happen, but I think that given the current constraints where the mayor appoints 100% of all committee members, how the budgets of each individual committee takes place is, pulled back and constrained, by mayoral authority. In the next time we meet, I did this review of how committees relate to departments and how, it was something like 8 committees relate to community development. And there are some departments that have no committee review at all. I think those kinds of issues, even for those committees that have some kind of tangible relationship to the department and how it functions, very rarely does it get into the nuts and bolts, and I think nuts and bolts are the budget.
So David, do you mean to bring that on Friday to the meeting?
Yeah,
on
send it
Friday?
to you, yeah.
Will you come to that?
Yeah.
Because we're very much deep in discussion about this issue at the BCC
Oh,
subcommittee.
all right.
Yeah, and I'll
So
talk
if you
about it a little bit, but I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And you weren't talking about the mayor's authority to appoint department heads?
No.
Group 21s,
No.
that you didn't mean that power.
No.
Okay, just wanted to be clear.
No, that is executive authority. I mean, it's classical executive authority.
Yeah.
And I think where the city breaks down is that we don't have the common notion of a legislative review and autonomy.
Mhm.
Legislators have to be autonomous of the executive. And everything from chairing our meetings to appointing the people who are sitting at the meetings very often. So,
I believe that we have sort of transitioned into item 7 on the agenda. I just want to make sure that anybody had any other questions for Roger on his structure. To thank him for doing that. I appreciate that. It's
Yeah.
really worthwhile. And now we can continue on with item 7. Is this a time to talk about the appointment of the authority of the mayor with respect to both residents and council members on the BCCs, or are we not ready for that yet?
I think we should wait until we're done with the report for the
Okay.
BCCs and the council to
Right.
do that, but just because
Yeah,
we're gonna
I
get into the
We're in
same.
the weeds, yeah.
understand, I just wanted to ask if you were talk about it.
So are we referring 7 to the next meeting or to the when?
Oh, no, this just had to do with, I was just asking a question with respect to appointment
Oh,
of members of the BCCs specifically, and whether we were going to discuss that any further.
okay, thank you.
Hearing nobody saying we were going to do that. Now, with respect to the other structure questions as they relate to the mayor's office.
The issue that Roger raised initially with Enos, and it relates to how the mayor's office functions. The issue raised was the number of reports. There's a number of people who report to the mayor. That's the chart that was given describes about a quarter of the people who report to the mayor, because when you look at the departments, all of those people, and in fact, many of the divisions, what's given as a division, such as the engineering division, the parks division, streets division, the water utility, all those people report directly to the mayor. Now, they also talk to their assigned liaison, but really in terms of the policy issues that come about, if there's any kind of alteration of policy, as opposed to just discussing day-to-day operations, that goes to the mayor. And I haven't done a count, did you count them? There was a
Well, it's
30.
varied over time. I counted years ago when it was over 30.
Yeah, it's probably like,
No, it's actually not, it's been reduced.
As in-
Since all of the public works related, it's not true that they all report directly to mayor. It's like the lead public works guy, Rob Phillips, does. And now that we have transportation, so Metro doesn't, TE doesn't, parking doesn't, it's one person. So it's not exactly the number of
Yeah, so at
departments.
one time, after
but it's
eliminated
definitely-
the director of transportation, eliminated the
Right.
director of public works. So you're saying
And we're
that
bringing, we
the
have
public
now,
works lead person now is oversees the individual public works agencies?
he's lead of a staff team and he got
Yeah.
a raise because he gets extra
Yeah.
pay because of it. And he only reports to the mayor, so none of those other report to
Where
the
the,
mayor.
where the issue comes in,
But it's still like the low 20s.
where the issue comes in, and I witnessed it both when I was street superintendent and when I was HR director, is there's just no way for the mayor to keep track of what's going on in all the different agencies. And occasionally, the department heads will go off the reservation to speak, so to speak, and stray from there and start doing stupid things. And the mayor's office doesn't find out about them forever because they don't have regular meetings. They don't. I mean, you're lucky if you got a quarterly meeting, and usually it was about 15 minutes. And again, I just found that this.
So there's no regular department and division heads meeting anymore? or-
Yeah, there is.
Yeah,
Oh,
but, you know, it's a sideshow. I mean, there's 50 people there.
yeah.
Oh,
And it's a show and tell. And it's just, in the city's effort to save money by eliminating a lot of these super department positions, they've created a very wide, flattened out the organization structure, basically, and the mayor has a lot of people reporting to him. And I know, for example, David, you were concerned that the water utility manager
Right.
wasn't getting proper supervision, as an example. And
And
I
I
can
think
see it,
that they-
that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, they, in the chart, report to Rob Phillips, but in actuality, they were separate.
Unless he's like Larry Nelson, which I'm sure he's not. Larry Nelson knew what everybody was up to in the entire city.
Yeah.
But I don't think Rob operates the same way.
Well, DPCD is similar.
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking at this thing, I don't see Natalie reporting to anybody according to the thing that Enos gave us.
Oh, no, we don't
It's
have,
this.
we don't
Yeah,
have the
no,
city
it's this.
organization chart. I don't think this board's gotten a copy of that, have they?
Well, technically,
But that's not a report, they don't report to the deputy mayor, they report to the mayor.
that's what, no, Enos just said that they report, well,
They
this is what
don't
I'm,
report
well,
to the deputy mayor.
Enos just said they did. And all I'm saying is that was my question, is that how do you have, but you're missing some of them are not on the thing, so like, who are they reporting to? And then also, if you have 4 directors under DPCD, and they're all reporting to different folks, and where I start getting it, where this starts showing up is, goes back into that committee structure, when you're looking at the issues that are brought to the committees as they pertain to citywide issues, and if you're wondering why it feels like some of these things should be more connected, looking at this and the way that its information is flowing, it gives you a little bit of insight as to how that might happen, right? It's like structurally. But I hear what you're saying about whether that's happening in fact, that's what Enos just said, is that they
Well, I
are.
think that each deputy mayor has to have, I'm gonna say departments because I'm in nursing home mode, but anyway. Has to have something underneath their authorities as a liaison, right? But each department head, they have a department head meeting, and that is with the mayor. But, I mean, they can't sit there and do nothing, so they have to have something under their purview.
Okay.
Well,
I'm just saying, it's not saying that they report to them, and then Enos reports to the mayor, right? I mean, we can go down into the weeds, right, and really beat it, but I think that this is an overview and shouldn't be treated like it is heart surgery, unless we want to go that deep, because I can go as low as you can.
Well, isn't the reason that we're concerned about this is because of the necessity to carry out the policies that we think are desirable, among them being engaging residents in something. And if we can't figure it out, and you can't figure it out, there's a problem, right? So that's why I think we do need to look at this.
And it appears to be structural, which
Yeah.
is our job to figure that out.
I mean, I think it's throughout the entire organization.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
too many people reporting to the mayor. There's too many boards and commissions reporting to the council and the mayor. And so the more you spread out the responsibilities, the more difficult it is to keep track of it all and to supervise it.
For people to understand.
And as long as everybody, is doing the right things all the time and heading in the right directions, it's fine. But when they start to stray, nobody knows about it. I became appointed interim HR director because my predecessor had stopped coming into work. She apparently had an anxiety disorder that nobody knew about, and would come in the middle of the night, but wouldn't show up during the day. And it went on for months. And the mayor wasn't aware of it, or she didn't want to deal with it, I don't know. But that's the kind of thing that happens sometimes. People start to stray off, and nobody knows what's going on because the span of control is too great.
Well,
And
it's
I-
not, it's
And nobody
not just
tells
that,
either.
it's the,
Right.
that, I mean,
This
that's,
is-
Drop the dime on.
They did.
that's the issue, that is, yes, an issue, but there's also the opposite and sort of opportunity cost of that, which is things can be chugging along. But they're not being focused and directed in a way that could have so much more impact
Exactly.
if things were functioning in a more cohesive way.
It's sort of ironic, and I remember when the director of public works position was eliminated, and the solution was to bring all the division, the public works division heads together to meet on a regular basis, and we actually started communicating together better and started solving problems as a group. But if one person in the group didn't want to do one thing, Parks didn't want to do something, the streets wanted to do something else, there was nobody there to crack their heads and say, no,
Yeah.
this is the way it's got to be. And again, that's the sort of thing that happens when you flatten out your organization structure, like the city has done.
Yeah. That's always
Engineering and
happening
parks
with-
were two that never get along.
Yeah, it's still,
And that's what was happening with transportation with 20 years without a director, which we hopefully just rectified by
They
getting a
just start to
director.
stray off in
Yeah.
different directions and do their own thing. And
Yeah.
there isn't anybody there to really make it cohesive and make sure the plan is done correctly. And for that, what you had mentioned, Justice, sometimes different agency functions got stuck in a particular agency because it seemed like it was a marriage, but in reality, they were different, and they started going in different directions, and maybe started doing more with other agencies, and the organization structure wasn't changed to reflect that.
Mhm.
So the organization structure is tricky, there's no two ways about it.
So, I would ask the chair, I mean, the question I would have for us though is this, because this seems like something that needs to be, we're supposed to be done with this in July, right? I mean, because this is one of those things I wondered whether or not we have to look at this independently.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't see any way, I mean, this is a massive undertaking to get into the actual structure of the city. I think at best we can identify an issue and
Right.
indicate that it needs to be done. Then
Yes.
actually, I mean, it's like, deciding which committees should.
Well, I would just
exist
say
anymore.
though, that this is fundamentally, why we're talking about it at agenda item number 7 right now is because this is, in essence, the structure of the mayor's office. Because we're talking about the way that reporting is done, and at the end of the day, it's reporting to the mayor's office at this time. And so like what I would say is that this is asking us to examine the structure of the mayor's office, just like we're doing with the common council and that we're doing with the boards, commissions, and committees.
But what we're talking about right now goes deeper than the organization within the mayor's office. We're talking about how the city's organized itself, how does parks and engineering relate?
well,
to
that's yet a separate issue. But
And that's the deeper part.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
deep, but I'm just talking about this immediate problem that
Yeah.
we traditionally, I don't think Saginaw is really unique in this. I mean, you'd know better, Roger, that this is historical. And we always have this mass of people who are supposed to be reporting directly to one person, and it's really impossible, not feasible. And you get all the kinds of issues that you mentioned over the years.
And the city's growing,
Mm-hmm.
the agencies are growing, and to some extent, there's new agencies being created. I've seen since I've been gone for 10 years, looking that there are new agencies out. And the number of people, if the organization structure gets further out of whack, it's going to be more difficult to be responsive and to be forward-thinking and to be able to deal with emergency problems, because you're going to have, now, they've been able to hold it together to some extent by increasing the number of assistants to the mayor. And
But I think in most cities where we have this deputy mayor structure, and of course that's the case in larger cities, the deputy mayors actually supervise.
they
Have
have
authority.
line authority.
Authority over.
Right,
So
They
I
don't
think
here.
Enos was very careful to always say that we're the liaison.
Yes.
That's all we do. We sort of pass information up and pass it down. And if I called Katie Crowley and said, what's the mayor's latest position on jurisdictional transfer of roads? She couldn't say because she'd have to go check with the mayor, check with Rob, as opposed to having a person who's engaged in developing that policy and is able to articulate it. So having these information liaisons, I mean, it's an expensive budget item.
Yep.
To have people just go to, look at the number of meetings that Gloria
Oh, she
or
doesn't
Katie
go
would
to
have to go to.
The point though, I mean, even in reality, but the point though, what I really appreciated the way that Roger put out that kind of meandering, how these departments can kind of do that, because I would say there's a similar, that's happening with the committees also, with the commissions and the boards. And then you throw in a uniquely large common council, and then the fact that they're part-time, and you know what I mean, like all of a sudden you get, and then you end up with this task force, right? Because it's doing this thing where it's huge, and it isn't quite clear that it is either A, representing or reflecting the voices or the realities of a growing and changing city, and it's not necessarily effective at addressing any of the most pressing concerns that we have that are, you know, ranging from our this unique weather that we're gonna start experiencing all the time, or just a lot of the things we're getting just in terms of a changing demographic, right? And so it's because it is something, like I said, I wish I could have captured the way that Roger explained that meandering, because that is in essence what we're seeing with the BCCs, right? Like this is what we're uncovering with them too.
One of the things that it said is that we want to preserve each mayor's right to organize their own office. Is this something that we can do we even want to try to impose that on the mayor's office?
We're imposing it, I think.
I mean, recommend
Make
imposing it on.
recommendations.
Or analyze it,
This
we
is
can look
not-
at it and explain what's
This is
happening.
not a modern management tool. Method is having 25 people directly report to them. And then, further, I mean, I would question really how to make the deputy mayors something more than information liaisons, but to give them actual managerial authority, which they really have none. I guess some have more than others, but basically.
If you look at the state, I mean, the governor comes in and has a ton of political appointments that they make. The county executive in Milwaukee is a very similar type of position, they have almost as many. Those people they appoint have line authority,
Mhm. Yeah.
and it reduces the number of people that report to the mayor, so I mean, or to the governor. So it's not inconceivable that you have that, but I don't know how the structure is imagined is written into the legislation. What this committee could do is identify the problem and make either recommendations for how to deal with it at the bureaucratic level in terms of, super department heads or something, or the option, which would either have real deputy mayors.
I think one of the issues with a lot of this stuff is it's so people dependent. I mean, between the department heads, we've got a good department head, that recognizes, the loose chain of command, the six of that at work, but then also mayoral style. I mean, we've obviously had the same mayor here for quite some time, very often, and you wonder if a new mayor comes in, what would be their structure, and should it be that loose? Should it be okay for the mayor to have their style be what the style of the city reporting is and how the stuff is structured? And that's a decision that probably should be made here is, how much latitude should we be giving to that position to decide how people report up?
So I think
How
the
much
down,
latitude to give to the mayor?
The mayor, yeah. I would argue that because of how big the city is getting and because these problems, are not good problems to have with, a ton of agencies doing their own thing and not collaborating, and that we probably should be putting some structure in place regardless of the mayor and the mayor's governing or management philosophy.
Well, I think it's just, as you say, it's historical. So each mayor comes in and, how did that guy do it? Oh, these are the deputy mayors, they talk to the department heads, they pass information back and forth, and you keep all the authority. Well, that sounds good.
I mean, I would say that creating, like the state, cabinet level appointments in the mayor's office has a real downside, which is continuity. When you're changing those people with each mayor that comes in, you lose a lot. You lose a lot because, I mean, at least with the state, when they went down to, division heads and so forth, down that way, and you have a big changeover every 4 years, say.
That's what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, that is not necessarily a good model for government. I would say looking at consolidation in the organizational chart and making these continue to be Comp Group 21 type appointments where they have a 5-year term, is a much better way to go than create people in the mayor's office that have line authority over big departments.
I would argue though, I mean, I think the state does go overboard. I mean, they definitely go down 2 levels. I do think that at some point, a mayor should have the ability to have a little bit more say on how the that executive branch works, and you struggle to do that. So like, for example, I've noted as we appoint people or give people new contracts or give people jobs for 5 years, if for whatever reason Soglin doesn't win, the next mayor will have a term of 4 years and will be stuck with those people for better or worse. And in some of those departments, you won't have the ability to put your stamp on whether you want the, whether it's the parking utility or the IT department or that type of stuff. You won't really have any ability to manage that or to work with that. I see that as a similar problem.
You could if you did performance reviews and work plans,
Well, I mean,
That is one way of handling it.
which is not happening in the city right now.
And you do still have the reappointment issue.
Yeah.
Not everyone turns over in that 4-year period because they're 5-year terms, and that was deliberate. The council
Right.
decided on that to be 5 years because it did not
It used
want
to be
these
they're
people.
all civil servants,
Yeah,
Right.
and they had to almost be, you'd have to get rid of them for cause, and that was really difficult. And when they switched over to the 5-year terms, was considered to be pretty radical. At the time, the members of Comp Group 21 sued the city
right.
because their jobs were being threatened. They lost the lawsuit, but then when Shislevitz came in, he wanted to have a 5-year term with a 2-year probationary period. And I can tell you, at the time, I was HR director, it was really hard to fill those positions. Because people, especially coming from the outside, I still to this day don't understand why Mike May took the job. Because you could come in from Alexandria, Virginia to become the new planning director, and all of a sudden you don't pass your probationary period, and meanwhile you've lost your house and everything else. So I mean, there's a difference between how much security you provide as managers versus having total authority to move the pieces around.
Once we've moved to the 5-year thing, historically, how often has a 5-year contract not been renewed?
Well, let's put it this way, I'm the only person who served as HR director who hasn't been fired. And there's been several, I think 4 or 5 of them who didn't have their
But that's a
contracts.
But did you have the
Position,
contract?
that's
Didn't
an
get their
unusual,
contracts renewed.
that's
The
an
water
unusual
utility
department.
manager didn't get his contract renewed. I think one of the parks guys was being pushed out the door
Yeah.
when he
Planning.
left. It's happened.
Planning director.
Planning happened.
Mhm.
Now, granted, they're probably, the parking manager,
Yeah,
one of the parking managers
Yeah.
was pushed out.
Metro.
Make it off probation.
Well, there was another one
It was-
before then
oh,
that got
before
pushed
that.
out the door. So it's happened. And so you don't want them all to come due under the 1 4-year term.
One year.
Look up at the federal government right now and see what you might get.
well, I mean, all these things, I think it's why when you listen to people who are running for office saying they're gonna do all these things, I always wonder, how are you gonna do anything? You're gonna do exactly what you've been doing.
No,
because
but that gets
how do you
to-
start moving this thing? This is
Yeah.
gonna take a lot longer than a 4-year term to actually chip away at this, and it's gonna have to be, this is gonna go back, I feel like we should spend some time on this as a function of the mayor's office, just so that, and I totally agree with what Roger's saying, is we don't have to come with an alternative, we can identify how it's functioning and what we're seeing manifest because of the current structure, and we can identify that, and that can be, I think, a very important piece of this final work that we do, because I think that it is, because it's just like everything else, the synergy between these 3 areas is so real, so it's been very difficult for us to stay disciplined within the BCC subcommittee, because so much of what we're looking at is about the Common Council and about the mayor, and I would say the same thing's happening with the BCC, right? Or, I'm sorry, the Common Council stuff, so.
Yes.
And it's interesting, because I think, you know, if you do become mayor, you know, not being able to change a new mayor, not being able to change your deputies, from my
You can
perspective.
change it.
Well, I'm sorry, you can't change department heads,
No.
you can change your deputies. From my perspective, you know, having 20, 30 people report to me, if I was the executive, is impossible. You know, and it's much easier for somebody to be off the reservation opposed to having them funnel through people that report to me. So it seems like, you know, possibly the next mayor will agree with that idea and make changes on their own or ask the council to help for changes there. So it does really come down to the person there, whether or not they recognize that this function is something they want or not.
Roger, does the
Especially if they're
contract
Right.
the manager.
with Conflict 21 people indicate who is the reporting, who they report to?
Oh, yes, each individual manager, it indicates who they report
Yeah.
to. In most cases, you know, many cases reporting to the mayor, but all the subunits within planning and development all report to the director.
Right.
And now we have, I understand we have a transportation director, so that would be in their contract, that they report to that. And it has a very significant fiscal impact too. So for example, if you wanted, like for example, I think there should be a director of public works. I mean, this is ridiculous that there's, but get a director of public works, and you know, it's 150 grand plus secretary or administrative support staff. That's 200, it's a 200 and some $1,000 budget item, right there. And I don't know how many of those kinds of
And so there's
positions.
not doubling also as the director of engineering. I mean, that's the problem, is Rob's supposed to.
Right, you'd have to
All
eliminate
these other
that.
major divisions and deal with, you know, road construction contracts.
Yeah, and in reality, it's just, again, unless you're Larry Nelson, you put 72 to 80 hours a week in, you can't do it. And so it's a title thing only, really. It's somebody to call when shit hits the fan.
It'd be interesting, I wonder how many, and, you know, I know, and again, you know, I've always gone back to my whole opinion experience, the directors of the departments there knew that their job was contingent on who the mayor was. And in New Jersey, that was fairly common, a new mayor would come in and you would go find a new job. So, you know, that was that industry. If you decided to go into that industry, you knew that your job was dependent on that administration, and you moved around. You know, I don't know what's common here in Wisconsin, and frankly, I don't know what's common in Wisconsin.
And I think it could be difficult.
That's East
I'm sure
Coast.
the patronage system is.
Right.
That's what you'd end up with, and that's.
Tammany Hall.
and that's why they were civil servants at one
Right.
time. But I can tell you, it's difficult to hire those top positions from the outside. If there's nobody good on the inside of the agency that wants it, it's really hard to get good people from the outside. People on the inside know how Madison works. And coming from the outside, there has not been good success.
I do think the
Well, they operate
authority,
the way the medicine doesn't work, but right.
I think the reappointment authority serves some of that function in terms of being an
Oh, yeah,
effective
it
supervisor
does.
as a person. Because they know that they're gonna get reappointed by the mayor or they're not, or there'll be something negative that will be known about them for the next mayor. So I think that's is some control without giving up the total,
But the difference is, because the span of control is so great, it's hard to keep track
yeah.
of how people are doing within that 5-year contract. That's what the weakness is.
There's no follow-through.
Well, there's some, I mean, I don't know how
I wouldn't say.
Simon
Not
does it.
efficient, not effective. Not effective.
One of the things that I would say, going back to you, Keith, is that I don't think Madison, but when you talk about the department heads would be there for 4 years and then no, they have to leave. I don't think it's that easy to get another job here at the same level as it would be on the East Coast or would be on the West Coast.
Sure.
So as far as, I mean, if we wanted to recommend that, we could, but I just don't think in reality it would be a true transition.
Yeah, for one thing, you'd never get anybody from the time inside the bureaucracy willing to take the job. They wouldn't want the risk. We have enough of that problem now.
Yeah.
There is the way that the state civil service works on that.
Yeah,
which is
you
you
don't
have
come back.
rights to come back if you take a job like that. So, you know, that kind of protection could be included, but it's me.
But that also affects someone else in
Well, oh, yeah,
Exactly.
it's a mess.
That's what happened in Milwaukee
It
County.
goes all the way down to foreman level.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people are okay one day being the boss and then having, not being the boss anymore and just being in the department.
So we actually had
Well,
that
it doesn't
discussion.
even have to be that department, that's my point, right? I mean, you
I-
can get
I-
bumped into
yeah.
another department.
We had in the streets, we had the operations manager got promoted to street superintendent. He could come back under the, you could theoretically under the policies. But meanwhile, down the road, somebody in the union got promoted to the foreman position and eventually got vacant. Once they become part of management, they don't have the right to go back to the union.
Yeah,
And so these things shake all the way down.
yeah.
I keep going back to the Marine Corps, where there's no apply. You are directed to report. You are directed to report. You are now this position.
They
Thanks
say
for playing.
justice, but you're always
We'll recommend that.
You're just on reserve duty right now.
So we said about the alder, we should just have, it should be mandatory service. Just every once in a while, you're gonna get a letter in the mail, you're an alder now.
I think this will create career executive positions where those people could be assigned anywhere. They could be sent anywhere, at any time. If we're in this career executive, that maybe, I don't know if it's still that way, but yeah, those people were kind of subject to the whim of where they go. I think they can keep their jobs, but they can get reassigned. I think.
No matter what, I mean, how do we capture all this? And how do we do this?
First of all, I haven't seen.
John, do it.
Well, I haven't seen an updated organization chart. Before I even start making recommendations about span of control, I'd like to know what it is.
Well, this is, I don't know if this is not a motion necessarily, but I think that there's discussion about taking this to a subcommittee so we can pick it apart a little bit. We're gonna have to do it in quick work, and we're just, everyone in there, so the only people who could, Maggie, Roger, John,
Well,
myself.
that's John's subcommittee.
Well,
No, this is
we're
this will be a separate one.
council subcommittee. We got BCC subcommittee.
Share the BCC.
We have the,
Well,
I'm
We have
waiting
the
for, I'm waiting for
communication and
an
executive.
answer coming out of you.
Executive committee.
Then there's the executive committee also. I mean, we can do it as a task force, we're doing it now, but some of them, like,
but I think,
Is quorum.
yeah.
right, well, the question, right, the quorum issue comes in, but then also there's a number of things, as Roger said, there's a number of pieces of information that'd be good for us to be looking at as we're talking about it, right? And so like,
Yeah.
getting a group of us together to organize that and to get this back to the task force so that we can look at this. And I still say that it's in essence a function of the structure of the mayor's office, just because of the reporting. But it's also just because,
I don't think that as I'd look at the resolution, maybe the drafter or co-drafter of the resolution was that I do not believe that it's within the scope of what we were asked to do is to look at the structure of the city itself.
No, but it's the powers of the mayor. So I mean,
That's what I'm
I think
going back
that's
to,
how we
is the
go
reporting.
into.
Yeah.
We look at the deputy mayors, the mayor's staff, and how that's functioning. And that, I think that's the way in, and we can make, strong recommendations about that with reference to this whole lines of authority question. I think that's how we go about it.
yeah, no, I agree. I think that's what I was saying about the
Yeah.
report. That's why this
Yeah.
falls under the.
So, do we,
Yeah, John?
yes.
I agree with Rebecca's analysis
Uh-huh.
on how we get to this. And unfortunately, Justice said something that I was nodding my head along with before, and then there was a whole bunch of static from somebody moving near the phone.
That'd
So,
probably be me. I was shuffling papers.
I was wondering, Justice, could you repeat what you just said before Rebecca spoke?
Yeah, as she does, Alder Kimball pretty much summarized what I was saying. I was just saying that we can look
Okay.
at this independently, but by using, as a function of the mayor because of the reporting structure. So she said it better than I said it either time.
Yeah, and I think the question is, where do we want to locate that possible work?
I was saying, yeah, I said that I think a few of us should dig deep into this. We'd have to do it in pretty short order.
Yeah, maybe this is an executive maybe instead of setting up another subcommittee, because it doesn't really fit with either of the working subcommittees right now. Although we could set up a quick subcommittee to deal with mayor's office issues, or we could deal with it at the executive committee, and I would leave it to the pleasure of the group to figure that out.
Well, you've wanted to have an executive subcommittee meeting, why don't we assign it to the
Okay,
executive
well,
subcommittee?
Okay.
Just for
Who's
the,
on the executive?
Who's on it?
Me, Eric, John, and Eileen.
And
and,
I'm on it.
Yeah,
And
Oh, and you're on it.
you're on
I'm
it.
on all of
and
them.
Maggie,
Okay.
and I'd sure encourage Roger to come, he knows where the bodies are.
Well, I think that's the thing, is I think if we go to the executive committee, we can figure out how to handle it,
Yeah,
and then we can go from there, and I agree.
okay, well, we'll get a meeting scheduled promptly.
Okay.
okay.
Fascinating.
So, is that the conclusion then of item 7, no further discussion on that, or you
Can
want
I
to add
just say,
something? Yeah.
I'm just reading from the resolution under the mayor. It says the first thing is powers and duties of the mayor, including the hiring and firing of department and division heads, and that might also be a way in
Mhm.
to talk about how that happens. Should the mayor hire fewer department and division heads, for example? Like, that could be a question, and then we could get at the size of the organization through that. If the mayor directly hiring. And then there's also the appointments and their general power, the general power. Size and cost of the mayoral staff. So there's a number of ways that we're explicitly authorized to do that.
Okay. Eileen, do you want to vote on that issue, or of creating?
I don't think that we need to.
I don't think so,
we
yeah.
need to vote. We have an executive committee, and we'll just take up the work
Okay. Good.
and schedule a meeting pronto.
Okay.
So John is there. John.
John Strange? Yes, he's here.
Maybe you and I can connect tomorrow and get going on scheduling this, okay?
Sure.
And
Thank
extend
you.
invitation to the other members of
Right,
the
and would it
task force.
potentially make sense to exercise the chair's authority to put an alternate on that executive subcommittee and put Roger on there, just if he's gonna be coming anyway?
Well, I didn't think we were doing, I thought we were gonna do it, the executive subcommittee was to figure out how to deal with this. And so whether or not we were gonna have another thing, I didn't realize that we're gonna say we're taking up the work.
Okay, that's different. I would be willing to do that too. And probably, actually, Justice, I think that's probably the better way to go than just assume that we'll do that work ourselves.
Right, and then at that point, yeah,
We'll
right.
then need to, if we decide in the end to form a new subcommittee, then we have to come back to the full task force to vote on this, or can the executive committee make that decision?
I can't hear
If
Maggie.
that's the case,
Ma-
why don't we just vote on it?
Ma-
Chair.
Maggie was asking the question whether the, either
Chair just-
you as the chair or the executive subcommittee can create another subcommittee, or whether you have to come back to the board to create a subcommittee.
If we decide that
And
this is
the
the
task
way
force.
to go forward with,
I think,
I think that our past practice has been that, that the whole task force has agreed to the creation of the subcommittees that we have in existence, but it doesn't mean that we have to follow past practice. I would certainly want there to be some discussion at the executive committee about how to address this work. And I think that my preference would be for the executive committee to come to consensus on this, and for us to, unless anybody wants to object right now, for us to simply let the rest of the task force know how it is that we have decided to proceed with getting the work done,
yeah, I'm just
in the
concerned,
interest of time.
I'm just concerned that
But
if,
if somebody has strong feelings that it ought to be done differently, I'm sure open to that, to hearing.
Sorry, Eileen, I interrupted you. This is Maggie. So my only concern is that we have to deal with the structure the way that we currently have and split up that work within the existing subcommittees. Otherwise, we'll have to wait until March to move on this. And I think you envisioned that we would want to do that work sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we're pretty close. I think with BCC, we got a couple things that we need to kind of polish off, but then I think we're done there. We're at the reporting.
So that could be one way. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can just move into that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have no objection to the executive committee figuring out, taking action and just notifying the rest of the task force. As opposed to waiting until the next task force meeting for a vote.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Does anyone else have an objection to that?
Are you talking about actually creating a new subcommittee?
Potentially, or the
Figuring,
executive. Figuring out how to
potentially,
address
or the executive committee.
Or moving it to the
They talk
BCCs.
about the way forward.
But would the
And then-
executive subcommittee actually be creating another subcommittee?
They could, that's a
Yeah.
potential.
Because the ability to create subcommittees lies in the committee, so we would basically be, they would be suggesting a subcommittee that would then come back for confirmation from the task force.
Is that John speaking?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm just saying that the committee is the one that has the ability to create subcommittees. It's not a subcommittee creating another subcommittee, so, the executive subcommittee could create a subcommittee subject to coming back to confirmation by the full committee, kind of like we did when we had to substitute Alder Kemble for Alder Skidmore on the
Right.
BCCs.
Why don't we just give the
But that was
executive
the
committee the
president.
authority to do that now?
Why don't we just,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah, I think that's
But
right.
that was that was distinct from the president's authority to appoint members. Those are two different things, right?
right, and I would
Are
just
those-
say, why don't we just handle that right now then?
Yeah.
So,
The
motion
authority
would
to
be
create
to
subcommittees is in the committee.
to move this to the executive committee for
So
further
you can
discussion,
do a
review, and
motion
action,
now to-
including,
Either assigning it to an
Potential
existing
creation of-
subcommittee or creating a subcommittee.
yeah.
I think John was just arguing that the executive committee cannot.
Well, I'm saying that we
Unless we
authorize them to do
formally
it.
Unless we
do it now.
delegate that.
Delegates the authority to
Well,
do
let's
it.
delegate.
Right now.
Whatever I just said on that thing, and that's what I,
Did you catch what you said? You were.
So-
Make the
so I moved to move this conversation to the executive subcommittee for review and to determine appropriate action moving forward, including the potential creation of a subcommittee.
Or assigning it to an existing subcommittee.
Or, yeah, but including
The creation of.
the creation of another one.
Right.
Yeah, okay. that's-
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Abstain. Alder Carter's abstaining. Okay. Item number. Let's just do a quick time check. 7:30. I assume that everybody wants to be done by 8 o'clock.
Right.
So I think that to the extent possible, we have minutes that are available of what's gone on at the subcommittees. We should make a high-level report of the subcommittees as opposed to an extended repeat of what everybody's done. So I believe that the first one is Justice on behalf of the Subcommittee on BCCs.
Thank you. To our vice chair, to our chair in Arizona. We're doing well. The big thing here is that we're pretty much at the point where we're already formulating what the report will be. The two things that we stopped to look at was a concept of an office of resident engagement and neighborhood support. And the reason that we did that, there was one thing that we did create was in essence a diagnostic tool where we could look at a lot of the things that we're identifying as being some of the challenges with the BCC structure as it stands. And so therefore, if we were to look at anything, we can kind of go through what we've identified in order to see whether or not whatever that thing is going to alleviate any of those pressures. So we tested this out with the concept of the Office of Resident Engagement and Neighborhood Support. It is something that we are, at some point, once we're done with that, going to bring back to this committee, because there's a lot of things in there that we've identified that could help us. And then the last thing that we have to, that we started doing last week and that we're going to continue this week is this conversation of appointments and about how that's working and, or not working, or the way that that happens right now. So that's the last item before we're ready to just move into the final report. Our recommendation was that once we get the final report, then we have a, I mean, in essence, it's a task force meeting, but I do think to the degree that it's, time permitting, we have an opportunity to discuss some of the overlap between this and the common council conversations. Because sometimes it's, it can become very ubiquitous. But we're, I don't see right now, so long as we're disciplined on Friday, I think we can get through the conversation of appointments, and we can, I don't think that we're gonna have an issue with the, March 15th deadline. Of course, John Strange is writing this set report, at least there's copies, so write swiftly.
And another one too. Any other questions for Justice? All right, we'll move on to the report on the subcommittee on the Common Council. We met 3 more times since our last meeting, had a total of 9 meetings, and what we did this last 3 meetings really is we went back through the minutes of the prior meetings, figured out if there was anything that needed to be added, and if there was any consensus that could be obtained. I can't report that there were many opportunities for consensus, so with respect to the terms, we have no consensus. There are both advantages and disadvantages. That's one of the major issues we have, and the same is for geographical limits, or whether there should be a hybrid. There were options on both sides, and I would say relatively strong feelings about that on both sides. So there is no consensus there. You'll be happy to know that with respect to staggered terms and term limits, that there was consensus that we would not be in a position to advocate for staggered terms or term limits, with the proviso, as with almost everything, that if you change something, there may be a reason to revisit it. And with respect to term limits, if we went to full-time or 4-year terms, we might want to revisit that. But for the time being, there was consensus on those things. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Same was true with part-time versus full-time. No consensus there. Advantages and disadvantages. Full-time alders. We did have the opportunity to be visited by Mr. John Brown, who's the CEO of Unity Madison. He addressed the group, and he basically indicated his frustration at trying to find somebody from government, whether at the state level or at the local level, who could help him resolve the urgent problem of the cold weather and the homeless. He said he had an organization, he had data, but he couldn't get anybody to listen to him. And we tried to explain to him generally that we really were not the right task force committee to deal with his problem. We would be glad to take his data and his information and try to pass it on to somebody, but that his problem was one of the problems that we wanted to address. We are very interested in resident engagement, and that we wanted to make sure that there was a pathway to do that in the future. Now that said, the next meeting we had the people from IT come to speak to us about their capabilities to provide that kind of resident interchange. And I have to say, I was overwhelmed by what they couldn't do. And as I look back on it, I say, well, what they do and their focus is on transparency.
And we didn't even get it to 211.
No.
We didn't.
No.
That's why.
Yeah.
311?
United Way is.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
911.
they do serve a transparency function in terms of the broadcast of meetings, and they cannot broadcast remote meetings even over cable TV, only by streaming. And so, and they have to have remote cameras where they do that, and it has to be the right room, and it has to be a place that can be connected to the city's fiber, whatever it is that they have. So that didn't work. And I just would say that there's so many things that we would like them to do that they can't do, that all of the kinds of interactions where you could have a person remotely come and speak to a meeting, even your basic video conference calls, there's maybe one room, and maybe this is it, that was set up to be able to do that, but they don't have the equipment and the cameras to do it yet. So being able to do anything that related to resident engagement from a remote location in a two-way conversation can't be done by them. And I can just say that it's, it can be done. They just don't have the resources to do it. They haven't been told that they need to have the resources to do it. This hasn't been something that's been a priority. So they're not prepared to do it, and we asked them to come back and tell us what it would take for them to be able to do it in terms of money and so forth. And it's very tied to the city's existing network of fiber. Whereas streaming is something that we all do. We've all been to video conferences, I imagine. We've all been to places where this kind of interaction can take place. And I know all over 10 years, the state's been conducting distance learning, where they have multiple locations with people, with students in the location, a person that's teaching it in another location, they interact and they can see each other. So it's time that we found out what they can do, and time to do this, because we can't do the kinds of things that we think and that other cities are doing without having this capability.
So they need money.
Well, that's what.
In order to.
Yes, yeah. And we're trying to attach a dollar figure to it when we make the recommendations, but clearly they have not done this. So it's going to probably be a big ticket item.
And just to note that this is as it pertains to resident engagement with the council. When you start getting into the questions and logistics around the boards, committees, and commissions, and one of the issues that we've been talking about is the inequities in terms of resources across the boards, commissions, and committees. The idea that they would be able to have the infrastructure to support 102 boards, commissions, and committees is, like that unto itself becomes unwieldy.
Yeah, and clearly, in terms of the resources and the dollars, having fewer BCCs to have to cover and do this with would be an advantage. We could have, rooms available, and the resources would be more concentrated. And it's a staffing issue as well as a hardware issue for them. They feel that they need to have this kind of setup with remote cameras.
And they don't necessarily, I think ultimately, I think we can ultimately, if we decide we want to do things, as John said, these things are possible. And I think, we haven't, as far as I can tell, we're not very shy about spending money on IT. The cost that they talked about setting up a room like this with cameras and stuff is quite expensive. So we've been spending money on stuff. So going forward.
Aren't these cameras?
Yeah, and the cost of outfitting this room is anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 in cameras. So we've been spending a lot of money on stuff. I think going forward, figuring out creative ways. Do we need 1, 2, 3 cameras to do everything we do? Probably not. I think there are creative ways to figure it out. It's just a matter of the capacity does not exist currently. If we want it to exist, we need to be clear that this is what we want, and I have to figure out a way to make that happen.
And we have to be clear about what we're willing to give up.
Yeah.
To spend it in another area.
Absolutely.
So, that said, they said they would get back to us by March 1st with at least a preliminary analysis of what it would take to do some of these things. It would probably be centered around what they could do at libraries or fire stations. Apparently, some of this is being done by them now to support the police department and the substations. And also the fire stations apparently have some kind of way of doing connections and video, and I don't know if by Skype or something positive. But anyway, so enough said on that. By March 1st, we'll get another report back, and we can look at it. But clearly, any of the engagement tools that go beyond allowing somebody to watch what you're doing is not there. So, more to be said from that. Any questions on that? We now have before us the item 10, which is on the amended agenda, the referral of the ordinance increasing the terms of the council and vice president. Maybe before we get into a discussion on this, has everybody had a chance to see it now? I think John has made copies of it now for you to have. And then if John could give us some indication of what our options are, having received this referral.
John, I got a quick question.
Yes.
We did have consensus around the four-year term, didn't we?
Well, I think we thought we did.
Until we started discussing.
No, we didn't.
And I don't believe that we really reached consensus. I think there were some reasons to maintain 2-year terms, which we did discuss, and maybe some of those reasons went away after Mike pointed out some of the things.
I was just curious, because I know we talked about this in that context, and I thought that was one of the things, is that this would make a lot more sense with a 4-year term.
Yes.
I think we did, that conversation devolved into like considering 3-year terms.
Yes.
You left that meeting early.
Somebody wearing a blue jacket.
You left early. Right, didn't we like at the end of that meeting say, well, why not 3-year terms? And then it was the unfair matchup with the mayoral election and who, like, there were a lot of things.
We didn't quite reach consensus on it, although I thought we were close. So, but for the discussion, and remember, we're not supposed to make recommendations, but to indicate where we found consensus and identify factors in favor and against making certain changes, so.
So John, you want me to?
Yeah, if you could give us what our options are when we get a referral, since this is not something we haven't done it.
Right, so there are basically 4 options. One is to recommend approval either with or without amendments. One is to recommend to place it on file, and either with or without prejudice. One is to do nothing and just send it back to the council with no recommendation. And one would be to refer it to the next TFOG's meeting for further discussion, as long, with the understanding that there's nothing that would prevent the council from acting on it without your recommendation. So those are sort of the 4 basic options. I think previously, matter was referred to the body and it chose to take no action. That was, we think that was the one when the mayor was talking about having an ordinance that would allow the mayor to delegate authority to chair a meeting. And so that was the action it took before, this body took before. But that would have been option 3. But those 4 options exist for you with this one.
So this was something that we did discuss in the council meetings. We did not achieve any consensus or agreement on this issue. And it is really, as we look at this, this is like squeezing the balloon, you make a change here and it comes out over here. And I think we've felt that we have to work on a plan where we start with one thing that we recommend and then take it all the way through. So we don't have a position on this yet.
So I would like to make a motion
Sure.
to place on file without prejudice. I can do a second, I can talk.
Second.
With the recommendation that, so without prejudice means it can come back within, is it 60 days?
It can come back.
Without prejudice, it can come back anytime, but with the recommendation from this group to delay bringing it back until this group has our final comprehensive recommendations out.
I would second that.
It's already
Like
been.
Skidmore already
It's already
Oh, I
been-
didn't hear that.
Oh, Alder Skidmore has already seconded it, so, yes,
So, can I just say some, oh, go ahead.
go.
Are we following
Alder
Robert's
Skidmore.
We're in discussion.
No,
we're
we
not.
suspended
No,
them, but,
they've been
Why am I not surprised?
yeah. But Skidmore, you were.
Yeah, I support Alder Kimball's rationale. I think it's premature to do this now. I think this was offered in haste with no prejudice on my part. It's not soup yet. I think it's premature to push it through at this point.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to say is, number one, I don't think it was offered in haste. I think it was well thought of. It might be poor timing, but it's not offered in haste. Number two, I think that the Dane County Board of Supervisors chair is a 2-year term. And in most executive committees of large corporations, boards, the chair is a 2-year term. So I think that eventually, this has come up before, we're not the originator of this concept, it's come up over the years, but I think eventually that we do need to go to that, to put ourselves in line with the rest of the municipalities.
Just.
Go ahead and not go ahead.
I think this is something worth eventually looking at, but I think in the current council configuration of 2-year terms, as well as the fact that the task force is looking at all sorts of different things, that I think it's too early. I think if our goal is to make sure that we are being inclusive and have equity on the council, and that this makes it much more difficult for people to become president and vice president, because the options, there's much less options available. If you start doing the math, the new class of 2019 would have to, any of those, unless they jump the line, they're going to wait something like 17 years if you assume everybody before them might have an opportunity to be president and stay on. I mean, it's just a really long time, and so I think this, and I also think honestly people have the ability to have a 2-year term if you ask your colleagues for a second year, and your colleagues believe that you should have a second year. So I think it's premature to be talking about this, in my opinion, because the task force is looking at other stuff. But if we just looked at it as is, as the current structure, I don't support this.
I don't think we're being asked to take up the merits at this point in time.
Well, okay, well, I'm kind of,
I mean, we are, if we're gonna take it up.
I just.
But the
So I
motion
did
right
that-
now is to refer it, so that's.
I only brought it up in
Place
the
on
council
file.
subcommittee, I did what
It's not.
Alder Furman did. And given everything we have learned about the challenges with the 2-year terms alone, and I totally agree with Alder Carter that 2 years unto itself as a standalone number is not strange. However, 100% of an entire term is not normal. That is not, I mean, maybe the county board does it, but 100% of an entire term is not normal. So having 2-year terms is not abnormal, but having 100% of an entire term is not.
What do you mean 100% of them?
So 2 years is an entire term, that's an entire city council term, so when it feeds in,
Same president.
Oh, I see,
you
okay.
see what I'm saying, so that's an entire, and so everything that we've seen, I don't know how we could say that right now with the information that we have looked at about the city council, how this could, why we would think that this would support or why it would address a number of the issues that we've already brought up. But again, I don't, this is the thing, is that I don't know that that's without prejudice, because I actually would say that given everything we have under the current structure, I don't know, I would say that this is very problematic under the current structure, and a lot of it came back to the math that Alder Furman just presented. And when I looked at that, it's like, no, then people who are just coming on would have to, they would never, and then we look at what Ron Trachtenberg brought up about the way that people term out naturally. And what you're saying is that any new alders would pretty much never be president. And that is an interesting, given that this is the data that we have, why would we even consider this? And I don't think it's without prejudice. I think it's very much, this is not good, according to what we've looked at. But again, that's...
So the motion before the body is to refer.
No, place on.
Place on file without prejudice.
Right,
So-
in the technical sense
Yeah.
of the word, without prejudice.
Without prejudice, where, are you suggesting an amendment that it be with prejudice, Justice? If
Well,
not-
my
if
thing
not-
is that we
if
were
not-
asked to look at this.
If
So we
not,
looked at it. We've been looking at this for how long we've had this thing. So we've been asked to look at this. We looked at it. I don't think that, given the information that we have at our disposal, I think it's premature because, I mean, if they know we're doing this work and they could potentially act on a number of the things that we brought up, why would they do this in the middle of this work? It doesn't make sense to me. But I just would say that, given what we do know, that this isn't a thing where I think that we do have some information that this should, there are some alarms that I think we have looked at that I think if we were even to go back to the subcommittee on common council, we would see why this is very problematic, given everything that we've talked about in terms of representation, you know, all these other things. So, I don't know.
The
what-
reason why I said without prejudice is because we don't know yet what the recommendations of our task force are gonna be. And if our task force recommends 4-year terms, I think that puts this proposal in a very different light.
Absolutely.
So that's why I say without prejudice.
any further discussion on this?
Yeah, just a note in favor of it is that I think regardless of, we'll make recommendations, they may or may not be adopted, we don't know when they'll be adopted, certainly they would, if they're adopted next year, then it would not take effect for at least 2 years. And meanwhile, I think the council operates at a disadvantage during that interim period by having presidents being only 1 year. When I first became a member of the council, I was sadly surprised that presidents only serve 1 year, and then people sort of come and go. And especially was the contrast with, here we have a mayor who's been around for 20 years, and you have this spinning chair of people, revolving door of people coming and going. So that's something that I've always wanted to see addressed. And everything else that we've been talking about is fairly hypothetical. But the fact is that we just still have 2-year terms for council members and 4-year terms for the mayor and 1-year term for the president. And I think this would address this in the visible, not the hypothetical future, but in the actual future. And that's worth looking at.
Any further discussion? If not, the motion is, can you read it back if you have it?
Motion to place on file without prejudice, with the understanding that we would bring it back if appropriate when our recommendations are done.
Let's do a roll call on this, because I sense there may be some opposition. So, all those in favor, raise your hands and we'll record your vote. Huh? And
I'm
Eileen?
raising my hand.
Okay. Everybody?
Raise it higher, we can't see it.
The sort of chair right now is voting. So,
Why don't we just
all
go
right.
around and say aye or nay?
Yeah. Kemble,
Aye.
Justin.
No, nay.
Wait. So you want to consider, you don't want to?
No, I think, given the information that we have right now, I do not think we should put that, I think we should say that this is not a good idea. I do not-
That's what the motion is saying.
No, it's putting it on a file, and I think that we can reject it, I mean, no, the 4
Place
options.
it on file.
Put it on
File. Place it on file without prejudice.
No, I get it, but we also, okay, I get that, I get it. I mean, but what I'm saying is that another option is to look at this thing and say no,
And to vote it down.
to vote it down.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
saying,
Right.
no,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying nay.
Okay, gotcha. I already voted.
You
I already
voted already. Cassidy, Norfolk,
Abstain.
Carter.
Come back and
Goodwin,
Aye.
Skidmore. Aaron's,
No.
Rothschild, aye. That is,
Alder
She said
Carter
no.
hasn't voted.
oh yeah, sorry.
no.
I'm sorry?
No.
1, 2,
What are you counting?
There's
I was
5
counting the
yeses.
noes.
Oh,
5 years.
5
Three-
yeses.
Three
Five.
noes.
And one abstention.
One abstention. So I say that the motion passes.
Motion passes.
Okay, yeah, how about that, we're at 8 o'clock. I don't think there are really any other items on the agenda other than to remind you of the meeting dates, which is starting on March 12th, and that's there, and discussion of future agenda items. On the agenda is the issue about relationship with the school district and the county, and whether that should be on future agenda.
Agenda items, I mean, there's another one that we didn't put explicitly on here.
The mayor's?
No, the staffing, the question about the staffing, we were still gonna talk about that Friday. But we said at the last meeting that I would bring that up as a future agenda item.
Well, we can always bring that up at the next meeting.
What's the nature, I mean, I was very impressed by Sensenbrenner's remarks at the meeting, but what are we really talking about?
Eileen, do you want to address this? I think you put this on the agenda.
Well, I think actually to spend some time discussing the gist of Joe Sensenbrenner's remarks and a question about whether we want to address this in any way in our report.
Well, I think, I mean, I was impressed by it as well, and talked about it with other people and so on, but is that within our purview of our charter, our resolution, to talk about a relationship with intergovernmental issues, or, I mean, that's what this is. I think it's critical, but I don't know whether I don't know how we
Well,
get.
I don't think it's only intergovernmental, I think it's also structural.
And where it intersects actually is in, I mean, even though we've already discussed this at length, but where it does intersect is with the first-class cities concept. Because under that concept, what you would have is a situation where the mayor potentially could appoint a school committee
Right.
versus having an elected school board.
Yeah.
So that's where I would see it intersecting. And I think, Joe Sensenbrenner, I thought that was, I don't know, I just was impressed by
Yeah.
that analysis.
Yeah. I mean, if we want to have a discussion about it, I mean, I'm fine with it, but I just didn't know how it sort of fits into the picture. What, so what do we do? I mean, we have an education committee, as you know, and a early childhood education committee. I don't know really how they,
And an elected school board.
no, I mean, education committee within the city.
So I know, I'm just,
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
I don't mind it as a future agenda item.
yeah.
I mean, so I'll just bring up the thing that, we wanted to talk about was the fact that we have not engaged staff. Specifically staff who are supporting committees. And there were some concerns, there was, basically some folks got a hold of me about some concerns about confidentiality and the way that that would happen. Because staff do not feel necessarily, so the folks that came to me, there's a few of them. Well, first they identified a bunch of stuff that's going on right now inside of councils, inside of committees with the relationship between the common council and just some of these issues that have happened over the last couple of years, and some concerns that some of them who have been working here for a long time have with the way that these subcommittees, the way that these BCCs are operating and the way that it works in terms of staffing, et cetera. And so the question that I had that we brought, that we talked about, and that we wanted to, that we thought would come back to this is how to, we have not talked to any staff aside from, the people who have wanted to come to these. We have not actually actively engaged or sought out their thoughts about these. And I think that there's a lot of insight that we could get from talking to some of the staff who are asked to work with both the Common Council, the Mayor's Office, and the BCCs on a daily basis. And so that was what I was saying that I wanted to bring for a future agenda item, is to talk through that.
I would second that. That is a big issue because a number of staff have expressed to me about committees, commissions, and boards, members of these bodies requesting staff presence and having high-level staff there, sometimes for people that don't show up to the meetings, which can be a big frustration. And on one committee I'm on, that's routine. So I think that's a very valid concern, because it eats up a lot of staff time. Just as an
So-
example.
Just as a future agenda, I mean, just something I want to figure out. Or we have to note in our final report that in this conversation of boards, commissions, of this whole thing, that we did not talk to anyone that works within the city of Madison.
And and I think there was a suggestion that a survey might be a way of dealing with it.
Yeah, it could be, and that's just something I wanted to figure out, just so that we do cover that before we're done.
And we're going to discuss that at BCC, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Any other future agenda items we want to note for the chair? Seeing that? 8:06, we didn't quite make it, but close. Having a motion?
Quick discussion, I do want to just thank all our public servants and neighborhood residents and everybody who comes to these. I do appreciate the work that everybody does.
And our resident documenter.
No, I was thinking that about the
Our own
IT.
city champ.
Like, see, if it wasn't for Brendan Compo, we would not have any, we would not have any IT support. We
We got to vote on adjournment?
Yeah, that was a-
Yeah, all of it, all of it, opposed?
Boy.